Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching India Tonight with me, Sumita, Kareer. Our top story tonight. Well, in Istanbul today, the second round of direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine collapsed after just over an hour. Turkish officials confirmed the brief session, followed by a significant Ukrainian drone strike on Russia's nuclear-capable bombers, and that escalated tensions between Russia and Ukraine once again. Ukraine presented demands for a ceasefire, prisoner exchanges, and the return of deported children, while Russia insisted on territorial concessions and NATO renunciation. Despite United States President Donald Trump's pressure for progress, both sides remain deeply divided. There are no breakthroughs that have been reported so far as those talks are concerned. The conflict, which is now in its fourth year, that continues to claim thousands of lives and shows fewer signs of resolution. And that leads us to the question, is peace simply a pipe dream now? And will the war continue to haunt Europe? Let's take that question and many others across to our guests who's joining us live right now. On this broadcast, joining us is Ruslan Bortnik, Director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, the Head of South Asia Practice at the Eurasia Group. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on ET Now. Let me first come to you, Mr. Bortnik. What's significant is a staggering scale and the impact of these strikes that Ukraine took. From being a defender, it assumed the role of an aggressor. I want to understand from you, how is this different from Ukraine's previous attacks against Russia? How would you describe these attacks that were led by Ukraine deep into the Russian territory?
It means this Ukrainian attack has a few goals, of course, political and military goals. For military goals, it means there is no only a battlefield or front line. It means that all the lands of Russia and Ukraine are under the fire. And not only Russia, but also Ukraine has ability to make a deep strike inside of Russian territory, and there is no safe place at all. Also, it was a preventing a strike from Ukrainian side to prevent the Russian strike, because Russian planes were ready to make a strike on Ukrainian territory before the negotiation. And so Ukraine was the faster in this situation, and we broke this preparation for this strike. And also it's military goals, and these military goals were very important for Ukraine, and it means the decreasing the military potential of Russia to make strikes toward Ukraine. But also there are political goals, and the first goal is to show that Russia is not so strong like it looks sometimes, because the last month is the viewers around the world, there was a very common opinion that Russia is winning in this war. The Ukrainian strike shows that Russia is not winning in this war, and Ukraine still has a huge capabilities to make a very painful and very damageable strikes on Russia. Also, this strike weakened Russian negotiation positions between this stage in negotiation in Istanbul, and also the strike supports and strengthening Ukrainian position on achieving more military aid and support from Western allies, especially from United States and Europe. So there are a huge scope of goals, and many of them were achieved during this strike.
All right. So essentially what you're trying to say is that Ukraine has now more say so far as these negotiations are concerned. These negotiations happened today with not much significant headway that was made into these peace talks. And of course, you are reiterating what Volodymyr Zelensky also stated, that Russia must feel what its losses mean. That's what will push it towards diplomacy. So let me take the point across to you, Pramit. Pramit, what happens to the idea of any semblance of peace? Is that a pipe dream now? Because what Mr. Bortnik is essentially suggesting is that these talks will give more negotiation heft to Ukraine. Would you agree with that? And give us an understanding of where do peace talks really stand now?
So the peace talks would, even without the Ukrainian drone strike, would have almost certainly not gotten anywhere, because the gap between what Ukraine and Russia see as the basic requirements for peace are simply too large. And even the question of a ceasefire I think Russia proposed a 2 or 3 day ceasefire, or maybe a prisoners of war exchange, while Ukraine, of course, has been pushing for the past 3 months for a 30-day all horizon ceasefire, which Russia, on the ground at least, continues to be gaining some territory and having some minor successes, is in no position to concede. The drone strike by itself does not significantly change the balance of power on the ground, obviously, but it does bring up the possibility or slightly increase the pressure or the incentive for Russia to consider the 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine has been pushing. At present, as I said, Russia's successes on the ground, even though quite minimal and very expensive, nonetheless mean that Russia has no interest in accepting a long-term ceasefire, knowing that a 30-day ceasefire would often lead to a permanent state, become a permanent state of affairs if diplomacy works in the right direction. So the drone strike, with presumably other similar strikes and maybe future economic pressure, we've been hearing talk about tighter economic sanctions, especially on Russian oil, could potentially get Russia to consider, at least move closer to the idea of accepting a 30-day ceasefire. That's about the only real impact we're going to see right now. But ironically, of course, because of the air drone strike and its amazing effectiveness, it would have been almost impossible for Russia to have made any concessions in Istanbul, because it would look like they were conceding because of the drone strike.
Right. But the more important question to ask here is that, of course, Mr. Bortnik, like you stated, the 2 to 3 day ceasefire, as is being asked by Ukraine, and of course a 30-day by Russia, and a 30-day ceasefire by Ukraine. But is a 30-day ceasefire a complete ceasefire? Can it be achieved at this point, especially when tensions are rising between both the countries?
It's also a very important question, but you need to understand this is some kind of technology fight between the sides, because Ukraine demand on 30-day ceasefire, the main part of that demand is unconditional. It means without Russian conditions. All we know that Russia stated some conditions for a ceasefire, like stopping military aid for Ukraine, mobilization, or withdrawing Ukrainian forces from Ukrainian region, which Russia announced himself. But Ukraine when Ukraine is demanding for 30-day ceasefire, unconditional ceasefire, it means without Russian conditions. Ceasefire without Russian conditions, without any concessions towards Russia. And Ukraine has support in this topic, has support from United States and the European part at the same time. Russia is not able to fully ignore these suggestions, because it looks very good from outside viewers, and so Russia suggested 2-3 days ceasefire in some part of front line, just to get to gather the bodies of the dead soldiers and officers, because of humanitarian needs, because of very hot weather in Ukraine nowadays, which makes a very bad health situation in the battlefield because of these dead bodies. So both the sides are trying to play this game about ceasefire. Russia is stating demands for ceasefire because Russia is not willing to get into the trap of Minsk agreement like it was before 2014, 2022. Ukraine is stated on unconditional ceasefire because Ukraine is willing to just annihilate Russian previous preliminary demands. And Russia also insisting on some humanitarian topics, in which Russia is in more stronger position than Ukraine.
Right. And of course, these are some of the conditions that you've mentioned, Mr. Bortnik, that have been raised earlier as well, when talks in Turkey happened. And of course, we've seen the ceasefire violations that have ensued in the Middle East, and perhaps the reason why Russia is asking for a 2-3 day ceasefire and then build on from that point onwards. But Pramit, where does this leave Russia, which is already reeling under the impact of this war? It is being globally isolated, and reports suggest that 40% of its economy economy is devoted to weapons and mobilizing this war economy. So where does this strike and where do these talks really leave Russia, at least when you consider the optics?
Reeling is probably an exaggeration. As long as they have China to back them, Russia is not isolated. India continues to be a reasonably strong economic partner, if not a diplomatic supporter of Russia. I think the real issue for Russia, though, is that having initiated this war, having been the aggressor, they need a minimum requirement. They need something to show. Vladimir Putin has to show to his people, I've gotten something for this war. His original plan of overthrowing the government in Kiev and putting a pro-Russian one, obviously is not going to happen now. All he can, therefore, is hold out is for the territory that he's captured, and that this be recognized internationally, or at least and by the Ukrainians, and that NATO, Ukraine not join NATO. But at present, he simply does not yet have enough military capacity, or he's not been able to push Ukraine hard enough to be able to have them concede those problems, which is why the impasse that we're seeing right now, Ukraine continuing to put up, or should we say, innovative ways to resist of Russia. And in particular, they've now become arguably the best drone warriors in the world. And Russia, but Ukraine cannot defeat Russia either. So you have this basic impasse of the two sides continuing to grind their way through this war, which is why so much of the effort now has switched to the international side, in which the main change has been the Trump card. I mean, the fact that President Donald Trump has come in and indicated that he's not a great supporter or a 100% supporter of Ukraine in this war in the manner that President Biden was. That is now, if you wish, the key variable in the present circumstances. But it has all resulted in one thing, that Europe has now, at least rhetorically, said that it will step up and try to fill the gap that America is threatening to leave. So you have it's the action on the international side that will now be more decisive in breaking this impasse. But at present, there's no evidence that the impasse will break probably all the way until next year.
All the way into next year is what you're suggesting, Pramit, that the impasse will continue, and it'll be interesting to see the involvement of Western countries and, of course, other countries in helping brokering peace between the two nations. But Mr. Bortnik, what do you anticipate now Donald Trump, the US president, to do? Is there going to be a possibility of him putting sanctions on Russia? Because he's also been losing patience with Russia now, with Vladimir Putin, from being a very strong supporter of Vladimir Putin. He stated that Putin's is killing people mercilessly, and he needs to perhaps stop. So, what do you anticipate from the United States side?
Maybe it's unpredictable, but I think the risk of sanctions against Russia from United States became lower now because Russia is looking for now. Russia is trying to look now not also like as aggressor, but also like a victim. And Lavrov called to Rubio yesterday, and they were discussed about the situation with the Russian civilian train, which was under attack, and a few civilians were killed. And Rubio said some excuses for Russia. So it means the United States criticized Russia a lot for the last 2 weeks about the Russian strikes of Ukrainian cities. During these strikes, at least 17 civilians were killed and a few hundreds were injured. But situation with the train, and again, situation with deep Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory, some kind balance in this situation. And from one side, Russia is very suspicious toward West, especially United States, because Russia maybe believes that behind Ukrainian strikes, there is a Western support. United States, Great Britain, and other countries, they helped Ukraine to prepare such a operation on Russian lands. So Russia is waiting for United States position. Russia is waiting from United States some kind of negative reaction on the Ukrainian position, because United States silence for Russia, it means that support for Ukrainian operation toward Russian nuclear power aircrafts. And from another side, Russia is is trying to state himself like a victim in this situation and to play another role. And I think United States will be very, very clever in this situation about the sanctions.
Absolutely, because this was one big bold promise that Donald Trump made, that he would end the war in just days, and it hasn't really ended. So he's also hinted in recent days, Mr. Bortnik, that the US might just drop its role as a mediator if there is no progress. So that comment is quite significant. That reportage is quite significant, coming in as it does from the United States. But let me come to you for your final thoughts, Pramit. Now, Zelensky stated a couple of hours back that Russia must feel what its losses mean, and that's what will push it towards diplomacy. Is he right in his assessment about Putin's war strategy? If not, then what will change Russia's thinking?
Well, the strikes while...
sorry, colleagues.
No, go ahead.
To Pramit.
Go ahead.
Okay.
To Pramit.
Okay. So the Russia, I mean, for Putin, while this is an embarrassment, and if you take the Ukrainian position that he's lost $7 billion worth of weaponry, this will be a huge embarrassment for him. More than the nuclear bombers, though those are important, but they were not going to be used in this war. He may have lost. The Ukrainians have claimed, they have not got a confirmation, one of only eight remaining AWACS aircraft that Russia has. But the point is that Russia still has the capacity to absorb that loss. So it's not enough for him to change his overall plan regarding the war. That's why I think the question of the foreign support to Ukraine continues to be the most important issue, followed by the possibility of sanctions. But the problem that America continues to have with sanctions, which is why President Biden, who was in many ways much more hostile to Putin than Trump is, cannot push the sanctions beyond a certain limit, is that oil prices, which is the primary Russian export, if Russian oil production is blocked, if its exports are blocked, oil prices around the world will still rise massively. The world is presently facing an oil surplus of about 600,000 barrels per day. But compared to Russia's 10.5 million barrels per day production, that's simply not enough to keep Russian oil off the market. Oil prices, however, will soften through this year, and that will cost Putin a lot of money. But at present, he's still not facing real domestic pressure. The war, he remains reasonably popular. The core Russian population, the European Russian population, is not being affected by the war, though the Russians have probably suffered somewhere in the lines of 800,000 killed or wounded. But it's still not enough for Putin to be under pressure.
Right, Pramit. Very, very cogent and very points well made so far as this war between Russia and Ukraine is concerned. We'll have to see the kind of international pressure that Russia will face and for how long it can continue facing that pressure. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine have exchanged, ladies and gentlemen, memorandum of understanding for terms of a peace agreement. It contains steps to achieve a full ceasefire. Ukraine, of course, is going to be studying that, and we'll have to see how the story unfolds from here till the time the next set of talks between both the sides happen. Thank you very much, Pramit and Mr. Bortnik, for joining us here on ET Now to share your perspectives on this big story. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it's time's up from us right here on ET Now on India Tonight. Hope you liked watching the discussion as much as we did putting it together for you. From me and the entire team, goodbye, and thank you very much for staying with us.